All right, we are going live, folks. Let's see, does anybody, Kia, do you have that open to check? My screens are maxed, so.
Yeah, I'll check.
Oh, here, it gave it to me. So there is a delay, folks. That's why it's kind of interesting to watch.
Sure.
It does say it's live now, so.
Am I supposed to be looking at that or?
No,
No.
you don't need to. Just we're just trying to double check we're live, and
We are streaming live, everyone. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
thank you. Good afternoon, folks. This is the United Parent Council Facebook Live presentation of What Do I Do This with My Kids This Summer, a mental health edition. My name is Melissa Schwartz. I'm the gifted chair for United Parent Council, and we welcome you to this presentation. We obviously are in interesting times and have been for several weeks. We have been dealing with COVID. Many of us, whether you had children in the PD school district or elsewhere, had children that you all of a sudden were home with you to be educated. So we all had to deal with that for the last several weeks. Obviously, in the past 7 days, 8 days, we've also been dealing with riots. I'm not sure where people are joining us from, so we could have people from outside of Phoenix and Scottsdale. This is focused on the PV school district, and we are a rather large school district, and we certainly have seen a variety of things happen in our neighborhoods. We do welcome you here and want to let you know, if you're not familiar with the United Parent Council, we are a longstanding organization of parents and community members. We work to educate our parents and community. We advocate for our children, and we work with not only other education-based organizations. We work with our district and collaborate on committees throughout the year. And we also, of course, work with fine professionals like the two ladies we have joining us today. So just a reminder, we set this presentation up about 2 weeks ago because we realized we had a lot of parents asking questions about how to handle and help their students this summer. So we obviously know the situations have changed, so some of your questions and answers may be a little different. We will have a question and answer period at the end of this presentation. You will be able to type things in the chat box, and one of our UPC folks on this call will be working to get those questions to Drs. Reuter and Wingers at the end. We do ask that you keep those questions general. This is a recording. This Facebook Live will be recorded. We don't want your personal information or things on there, and we will remove things if we feel they're too personal. We just don't want them stuck in a video for the next 20 years. So please try to be general in your questions, and we will get those answered. At some points, we will have some participatory screens come up, and you can go to mentimeter.com and join us to share how you're feeling and what your responses are. But for now, I would like to welcome both Dr. Reuter and Dr. Wingers, please.
Thanks so much for having us. My name is Dr. Laura Wingers. I'm the clinical psychologist and founder of Center Psychology and Consulting in Scottsdale. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today and to be with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Allison Reuter of the Reuter Center for Neuropsychology and Integrative Counseling. We were thrilled to be asked to speak with you today. I know we have similar types of practices, and I know that we're getting just a barrage of questions from families. What do I do with my kids this summer? With a note of panic in their invoices. Would you agree, Allison?
I would definitely agree.
And, you know, but here's another thing, you know, and this is a personal as well as a professional experience that I'm thinking about is, you know, what makes this different what makes this time, this challenge different than the challenges that we've faced in the past. And, I certainly have reached out and been a part of a lot of different community and national organizations focusing on these issues. And some really great information came out of Harvard University, the Center on the Developing Child. And I thought this was really pertinent to what families in Paradise Valley and around the valley are experiencing. This pandemic came after it was a very rapid and a very dramatic change. We went from business as usual in all aspects of life to a nearly complete shutdown, schools and businesses and daily routines. So that abruptness certainly is a part of what makes this different. It's also been lasting a long time. This is not a one moment in time kind of situation. This is lasting over a long period of time already. What are we, several months in already in terms of how this has changed our lives? And we know that there's a lot of uncertainty in the future ahead and what that might mean for what school looks like in the fall, for example, which I know is a big question we're continuing to have. A lot of folks have suggested that there's this pervasive feeling of threat in that so much of this is unknown, so much of this is unpredictable. Certainly it's beyond our control. And it's affecting all aspects of life at a personal level. I don't know a single person whose life has not been changed in some pretty profound ways by this. Certainly at the local community level, we're seeing the changes that it's created in terms of how we're doing our education for our kids, how we're working in our homes and in our communities, and certainly at the national and global level as well. So we're facing this uncertain summer, and we're facing an uncertain transition back to school. On top of that, as we'll allude to later, we know that that families have been affected in many different ways. Not everyone has had the same experience, and for some, the loss, for some, the stressors are far more profound and pervasive than they are for others. So when we're experiencing that type of thing, we know that this often can kind of overwhelm our feeling of being able to cope. So so I think Melissa Schwartz is going to share a bit kind of a stress meter. We'd like to hear a little bit about what your stress levels are in terms of those folks who are with us today. But I think the other really important thing to recognize is that we are adaptable. Humans, children are adaptable. So we know that we all experience loss. Loss is a part of life. And Dr. Reuter is going to speak later about the degree of grief and loss that is associated with some of this. But I think it's important to recognize that we're being called on to be really flexible right now. And we have to recognize that, well, we are experiencing a great deal of loss. We understand how to adapt, and that's possible to adapt with positive supports. So I see here we have our Mentimeter. We're asking a bit about what ages children are that are home with you this summer and all that apply. Certainly, I know in our practices, we're seeing families who've got multiple kids under the age of 5, or we've got the kid who's in high school and has lost those meaningful rites of passage in high school, wondering what college is going to be looking like in the fall. We certainly have a ton of these kids who are in those middle years, right? Who are in those elementary and middle school years, and really just trying to navigate school and the loss of their sports or activities or not being able to see friends. So we'll talk a bit about that, but I see that it's helpful to have a little bit of that information in terms of some of these age ranges. Yeah, and it looks like we're going to have folks kind of across the spectrum there. Thank you for that.
Are you both able to see those now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Thank you. So if we can go back to the slides, or do we need me to pop back over to that?
You should be able to pop back over.
Uh-huh.
Let me.
I'm going to do that. Thank you so much. Okay. Great. We good? Oh. Looks like it's asking me to jump in again. Yeah, so let's talk then a bit more about, this opportunity that we see, the opportunity for positive adaptations with changes here. Resume. Great. A couple of things that I think are really...
You may need to adjust your screen slightly. It's cutting off the right side, so just make it a little smaller on your screen.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. We'll do what we can with that. Yep. I'm gonna just have to move on from that. I'm sorry if that's getting cut off a little bit there. But a couple of just real key things that I think are things everybody's aware of. Use open, age-appropriate communication. Recognize what you're feeling. Recognize what your child is feeling. Validate those emotions, and I think that's so critical. We're sponsored in part with the gifted department at PB, and a lot of times we're seeing some of these kids who are highly gifted and perhaps developmentally asynchronous, who are really wrestling with the thoughts and emotions that are coming up with this. But we're also talking about kids really across the spectrum. So our families with children with special needs, what they're feeling. And as I said, across the age range. So I think that's really important. Reaching out and connecting with family and with friends, so important. Do that in whatever way you can. And we also really, as I mentioned before, cannot emphasize this enough. We really need to readjust our expectations. We're being called on to be very flexible right now. And if you're a planner and you like to be on top of this, you are well aware that that can be particularly challenging. One other thing I'd like to talk about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. One other thing I want to talk about is the way that stress affects your brain. And I think I've had the experience, and I'm sure many of you who are listening today have had the experience of what happened to my day? Where did my day go? I keep forgetting what it was that I was going to do. Why am I not being more productive? I'm not getting anything done. I can't seem to think straight. Other folks are saying, gosh, I feel like I'm losing my temper more easily. So recognize that stress and worry and fear really does affect your cognition. It affects brain functions like attention and concentration, your memory and language, reasoning ability, problem-solving ability. So you may find yourself distracted at times by the scary news that's out there, the challenges that we as a society are facing right now, wondering how your relatives are doing. I know a lot of families that I'm working with are saying, gosh, not just am I caring for my children at home, but I'm worried about my parents. So planning for school, or just worrying about perhaps even the supplies that you couldn't get. So know that because our brain is affected by stress as it relates to our cognition, it also affects our emotions and behavior. So I'll have some tips for you a bit later on about what you can do to help your brain function better under stress. And feel free to make a comment in the chat if you do have anything there you'd like to talk about, because I've got probably 8 or 10 tips for how to help your brain function better under stress. And we'll get there in just a moment. Melissa, I'll turn it back over to you for right now. It looks like we may be, are we good on the screen right now?
Dr. Winger, while we're waiting for things to kind of get rolling with Melissa over there, there was a question that came in, and I just thought I'd kind of pop in and put it on our radar. I know you're going to give us some tips, and so really looking forward to that. But
Sure.
Someone did pipe in with a question about, how do you deal with separation anxiety and regression for children? specifically. So if you could speak to that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, right. So separation anxiety and regression. First of all, let me normalize that for our viewers, that that is not an uncommon response to stress for children, and particularly for young children. If you're in those preschool ages or early school ages, you might see a child who's reverting to maybe being a little more clingy or a bit more baby talk, might have a setback in their development, you know, of a skill that they had, but they seem to not want to do that skill, for example. So that can be an issue as well. Melissa, would you like me to share my screen instead and I can get back on track?
Yeah, go ahead. I was trying to get it back to the side, but I can't. So let me just jump in here because we do have a lot of folks that have joined us since we started.
Let's do it.
We just want to let you know you're here with United Parent Council from PD Schools. We have some of our local pediatric neuropsychologists that work with a lot of our students. They do testing for our kids throughout the district and obviously do private practice with many of those students and families. In addition, if you're not familiar with United Parent Council, we welcome you to our Facebook page. After this is done, we welcome you to look at the variety of videos both of these doctors have presented before for us. And we have videos stored here on our Facebook as well as the PVUPC YouTube channel as well. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat. We have people trying to grab those questions. We do ask that you put general questions up there rather than personal ones so that your personal information is not stored. This is a live presentation that is being recorded. So please be aware of that. And we want to go back to our presentation and thank you, ladies. Go right ahead.
Fantastic. Let me just finish my thought there. As I said, we were talking a bit about what makes this pandemic different, and just this fact that so much of what's happening right now has really overwhelmed our feeling of being able to cope. But we know that there is the possibility of change in a positive way and finding meaning in what we're experiencing and our kids are experiencing. So that note of fear in people's voices when they ask, what do I do with my kids this summer? We have some answers. We have some answers for you in terms of how you can enjoy your time with your family, how you can support your child if they're struggling, how you can support yourself. Let's not overlook the importance of caregiver mental health and that self-care that's so necessary because you are needing to really be that solid foundation for your kids right now. And of course, you know, I hope we have time and that there's the opportunity to talk a bit more about how we can be supportive of one another in our community as well. It's such a time where we really need to be supportive of all members of our community in whatever way you can. Right. So before I turn it back over to Dr. Reuter, I'll just finish my response on that issue of separation, anxiety, and clinginess. Not uncommon for that to be happening. It is a reaction to stress. You know, certainly, again, depending on the specifics of a situation, you might going to want to talk to your pediatrician or a developmental specialist to support you there. But a lot can be solved with simply providing structure and routine and predictability. That sense of safety and security is so critical for kids, you know, and then, you know, finding quality playtime together. Often it's just a temporary situation and we can kind of get through that. But we'll have more specifics in those kinds of areas a little bit later on. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reuter for right now, just to talk a bit more about the toll of this pandemic and the situation we're finding ourselves in and some of the responses with regard to grief and loss.
Thank you, Dr. Wingers. This has been a trying time, I think, for all of us on many, many levels. And as Dr. Wingers kind of referred to, and as the slide shows, the toll is really not evenly distributed. My sister-in-law said something to me that I thought was quite poignant, that, you know, we've been saying, some of us have been saying, you know, we're all kind of in the same boat. We're all experiencing this at the same time and going through all the same things. And she said, no, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm out on the sea, but we're in different boats. And I thought that really captured the idea that we're all going through different things. And I think for a lot of us too, it's very difficult to identify what it is we're feeling. We're feeling so many different things all at the same time. I wonder if this would be a good time, Melissa, to get a little poll about how folks are feeling. So on this is a...
Let me try and pull that up.
Okay.
I
saw it a second ago. It popped on.
It did. I was trying to get to a different one and closed it down. So hold on one minute. There we go. That should... Ooh. Where did it go? Technology at its finest.
I know.
There we go.
Here it is. Here it is. This is great. So I want to take a little poll to share how you feel right now when you think about your children. I know there's a lot of things happening in the world right now that we can feel different ways about, and we certainly all do. But let's think about how we feel right now when you think about your children. So go ahead and type in some of the things that you feel. And Melissa, you can leave this up while I continue talking about all the things that we're feeling, and we can kind of see how it, you know, how the Mentimeter kind of shows up.
And just to make sure people realize, they need to go to that menti.com and use that code so they can put the words in, and they will start to appear on this screen.
And I'll just pop in and let everyone know I am putting the links in the chat on the Facebook comments. So you should be able to cut and paste from there too.
Awesome. Thank you. So we'll just leave that up while we talk a little bit more about all of the different feelings that we're feeling. So I see them already coming in. We're feeling scared and nervous. There's some sadness. I think for a lot of it, these are these vague feelings, kind of ambiguous feelings. Kind of a selective or a collective sorrow. And really when it comes down to what we're feeling, it really is a form of grief. Now, for some, that might seem a little bit weird to say that we're grieving. To some, it's a very, a real grief in the more familiar term, in that some of us have lost loved ones from the coronavirus. Some of us have friends who have lost loved ones. But there's other types of grief as well, other kinds of tangible things that we lose, that we grieve over, and particularly right now might be a loss of employment or loss of financial stability, loss of social connections and going to school. School for kids is kind of the only way of life they've ever known. So this is a very different thing. It's a loss of what we're most familiar with. We've also lost a lot of our coping strategies. If you're one to go to the gym to cope, or go and socialize, or go take a vacation to de-stress, or even have alone time, remember what that was. Those are all things that many of us use to cope, and we don't, now that we're in a time of even greater stress and worry, we don't have those coping strategies available to us anymore either. There's also some intangible things that we're losing right now. We've lost, like what Dr. Winger said, we've lost some predictability in our environments. We've lost that sense of control of what's happening. That on many levels, we've lost our sense of justice, especially more recently. And we've lost our sense of trust in knowing what's going to happen in the world. And that leads to a loss of safety. And these are sometimes what we call ambiguous losses. Loss of a loved one is sometimes more of a defined kind of loss. Whereas these other kinds of losses are what we call ambiguous losses. They're a little bit fuzzy. Because of the fuzziness of these losses, we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what things are going to look like later. It makes it much more difficult to move forward. It's just our loss of normal, and it's a loss for an unknown duration, and that's what makes it so challenging. So what we're feeling is that I'm looking at the Mentimeter and seeing that we're feeling overwhelmed and worried seem to be some of the most salient and common feelings.
And Dr. Reuter, if I can jump in, I saw something just the other day that a poll that came out of the U.S. Census Bureau data suggested that over a third of Americans are experiencing signs of clinical anxiety or depression right now. So that fits completely with what you were saying.
Yeah, it's really a kind of a mental health crisis in addition to a public health crisis. I mean, to the medical health crisis. I'm seeing there love. I love that's in there. That's a great thing to see. Frustrated, sad for the losses of your kids, and not only your own losses, but you know that your kids are losing things now. Yeah. As part of the process of getting through all of these feelings, it's important to grieve and to kind of name what we're going through. And kind of go through it. Grief has a purpose. We need to grieve. There's a place at Columbia University called the Loss, Trauma, and Emotion Lab. And one of the researchers there, George Bonanno, says that there's a purpose to grieving. It's about turning inward, recalibrating, thinking about how the world is different now and how we can adapt. So grieving is about thinking about what we're going through now and allowing ourselves to adapt. We need to feel grief so that grief can do its job. It really does have a job.
George Bonanno says that there's a purpose to grieving.
Oh, I'm hearing myself. Sorry, I got distracted by my own voice. Like, that's a familiar voice. I think going back to when we talk about grief, I think a lot of us think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's kind of the foremost authors writing about grief. And she talks about the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. One of her very close colleagues, David Kessler, came up with a 6th stage of grief also, which I think is very important. And he said that 6th stage of grief is finding meaning. That's often very difficult. When we're going through the different stages, I think when we apply these stages to the coronavirus and the pandemic and the quarantine, there's a lot of ways to look at that. Just to give you some examples, we can think about bargaining, of saying, okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, then it's going to be okay. I'm going to be safe after that. That's an example of bargaining. An example of acceptance, though, is, okay, we're in this situation and there's things I can do. So acceptance is kind of empowering. It shows us that we have some control. It brings us some control in the situation. So I can wash my hands. I can keep a safe distance. So there's those when we gain acceptance about a situation, that's when we're able to identify how we can control the situation, at least to some extent, and be able to live within that situation. So how do we grieve? How do we grieve the situation? Like I said, we just kind of have to say what it is. Keep a journal. Sometimes people like keeping a journal, so parents can keep journals, and some older kids who enjoy writing can keep journals, and journal about not just your losses, but also identify your personal strengths and coping skills that you're using to kind of face these difficulties. So important, of course, as Dr. Wingers has said, to stay connected with other people, talk about that, our collective grief and our collective losses, and also share with others what your personal strategies for coping are and your personal strengths are. It's also important to balance our thoughts. I think our default is to, when we think about a situation, is to think about the worst case scenario possible, like what's going to happen in the future. All these things, terrible things could happen. It's important to balance that with, I think it's unrealistic to say, don't think that way. We're all going to think that way. It just happens. But balance those thoughts with what's the best case scenario, or the most within reason, what's the best case scenario. And think about what that's going to look like too. And then return to the present moment. I think a lot of what's happening, and when I look at a lot of the feelings that we're all feeling, is very much a response to what we're thinking about is going to happen in the future. That could be very scary. So coming back into the present, it's very important. In the present, none of that has happened. None of it is happening at this very moment in the present. The worst case scenario is not happening. And we're comfortable. We have what we need. Our loved ones we know what's going on with our loved ones. So right now, in this very moment, in most cases, we're safe and we're okay. And we can take a moment to breathe right now in this moment. So that's an important part of grieving as well. It's just being with what's happening right now without thinking too much, at least what's going to happen in the future. I think a part of grieving, we're all grieving, we're grieving, and our kids are grieving. And to help our kids, of course, we need to help ourselves as parents. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wingers to talk a little bit more about what caregivers can do for our own self-help and self-help.
Yes, thank you so much. And you know what, I love that you kind of shared that idea of the stages of grief and you know what that looks like in this circumstance. And again, the ultimate goal of moving through difficult times is to get to acceptance, to get to some sense of purpose. And we'll talk a bit more about that. I don't know.
One other thing I just want to add really quick that I forgot to say that I think is important is that those stages of grief, they're not linear. You don't go through one and get to another and graduate from one to the next, and then you get to acceptance and we're done. We tend to loop around. We'll get to acceptance one day and then not the next, or 10 minutes from now we'll be in a different stage than we are this second. So accept that too, know that it happens, and
so true. It's messy, isn't it? And I think it's been my experience that people are a whole lot more comfortable right now saying, I'm not okay. And I'm really glad to, I mean, boy, isn't it a relief for you out there who are listening and with us right now to be able to say, you know what, I'm not okay. And to recognize you're not the only one. To recognize parents right now are incredibly stressed. And I sometimes have, parents in tears saying, I am just hanging on by a fingernail and trying to get through the day. And I get it. Nobody asked to all of a sudden be thrown into the role of working from home and juggling all your kids' educational needs and, managing all this uncertainty and stress. And as I said, for some folks, the toll is different. If you're facing job losses or financial consequences. For those of you who've experienced a loss or illness, I personally have had 5 friends who've lost a parent to COVID-19. And it's just staggering to me that, what we're all experiencing collectively as well. So I think let's just acknowledge that, hey, this Mentimeter that we took absolutely hits it. People feeling unsure, unprepared, frustrated, overwhelmed, sad, worried, all of it. So let me again return to the fact that we're resilient. We're resilient. So take care of yourself. I say all the time that what you can do right now to support your own mental health, it really matters, because kids are looking at us as the parents, as the caregivers, as the adults in their life. They're looking at us to figure out how to respond and how to move forward. So I say there's no child mental health without caregiver mental health too. We work together. The good news is that there's really 2 simple key ingredients for happy families who have healthy kids, regardless of what other circumstances they find themselves in. You can be facing tremendous stressors, but these 2 ingredients really matter in terms of long-term outcomes. And this comes from research that's kind of across the board. Number 1, a sense of routine and predictability. And I know we can't have some of those routines and some of that predictability that we had before, but some of it we can. So find that. The other thing I'd say is we know that having safe and stable and nurturing relationships is huge. So if you've got those, I often talk about thinking of a child situation or a family's situation in terms of risk factors and protective factors. And we know that there's a lot of risk factors right now with what we're facing, a lot of challenges. And if you've already got a child with maybe ADHD or anxiety or a learning issue, or someone in your family is struggling with these issues, then we know that, already you're facing some difficult challenges. But these two things matter so much. So that sense of routine, sense of predictability, and safe and stable nurturing relationships. But let me come back to the caregiver self-care thing. Self-care is not selfish. I know we often feel as parents that that's kind of the bottom of the list, but self-care is not selfish, it's necessary. So taking care of yourself, I would ask you out there to ask yourself, what's worked for you in the past, right? What's worked for you in the past? Ask for help. I mentioned earlier in our broadcast that, our brains don't function all that well sometimes under stress. And again, we're all experiencing that in one way or another. So a couple of tips I want to give you right now, and then we'll move into some things that are more specific to kids, okay? But number one, if you can, outsource some of your brain tasks, if you know what I mean. If your brain this is information from a colleague of ours, Marissa Mancohen, and she says, your brain might be running the coronavirus worry app in the background all the time. So the goal is to reduce other demands on your brain. Write everything down, even if you don't think you need to. Keep a to-do list. Check things off as you get them done, right? Set alarms to remind you about things that you need to get done or upcoming appointments, when you need to join that meeting or, email somebody. Just, outsource some of those kinds of things. Be sure you give yourself plenty of time. Getting things done might take longer right now than it would otherwise during this time of increased stress. So schedule more time than you think it's going to take. And if you got to, get through something, recognize you might need that. Double check. I think people have sometimes been asking me, parents in particular, saying, I think there's something wrong with my brain because I keep making these mistakes. And again, more often than not, it's simply stress, but you might make mistakes that you wouldn't typically make. So take time to proofread or double check or whatever you need to do. Try not to multitask. I know we all think we're fantastic multitaskers. I'm guilty of that. I'm sure you are too, Dr. Reuter, of just trying to multitask, but our brains are not very good at that. And so we really need to recognize that when we're multitasking, we're actually shifting. We're not holding it all at the same time, but we're shifting back and forth. And that's really incredibly inefficient, to be honest. So, think about if you're trying to, cook dinner and answer your toddler's questions, you're probably doing one or the other of those things kind of poorly, right? Because you can't really hold it all together at that time. So try to just get things done one at a time. Be kind to yourself. I can't emphasize enough how important. Give yourself a break. Recognize these are not normal times. And so we need to give yourself a break and have some self-compassion. One thing, and you alluded to it too, Dr. Reuter, is, that worry time. So you might need to again, find when you're going to let that worry app run full force. And so one of the techniques that we talk about in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a form of support for folks with anxiety and depression and lots of other issues too, is to schedule some worry time. To say, you know what, I am going to choose the time and the place, and I'm going to worry my brains out, right? I'm going to sit down on the couch from 4 to 4:30, and I'm just going to decide that I'm going to worry about all these things that are popping into my mind throughout the day. So if all of a sudden, oh gosh, I wonder how my parents are, or I wonder how that friend is doing, or this other issue with my kids, make yourself a note, mentally or physically, and then schedule that time and give it your thought. Another thing with regard to worry time, thinking about the news and the media coverage and how, what does that do to you? Is that making things better for you or worse? So stay educated, stay informed, but you might want to limit what you consume when you consume it. Choose to watch that news or read that news for maybe only 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. Don't be in it all day, off and on. You might definitely don't do that right before bed or while you're in bed. Give yourself some wind down time. These are simple tips though, for kind of taking care of your own mental health. Be sure you're taking care of your body. We're going to talk about that in just a moment with regard to what we can do for kids to keep them off screens and getting some physical activity as much as possible and in a reasonable way. But take care of yourself with regard to what feels good in terms of you moving your body. And seek help if you need it. The good news is that even in this time where our physical ability to be together is limited, lots and lots of folks are doing telemedicine. You're probably experiencing that in one way or another already. And it's certainly available. Both Dr. Reuter and I provide those kinds of services, as well as, everybody else in the Valley. So know that if you need help, it's available. And quality services are available. So make sure you're checking on that as well. Let's move on to that next screen, if you don't mind, Melissa. And, we'll just talk about the fact that we're going to keep it really simple. When we're asked that question, what do I do with my kids this summer? Simple. Let's do as much as we can to reduce the negatives. And let's increase the things that are positive in their life. Those are the two key things. And oh, by the way, if you want a project, I say practice and build some essential life skills. So if you go to the next slide, I give a little bit of a visual because, one of my mantras in the work that I do with families and children is it's all about balance. And we all have a lot of balls in the air. We're all juggling and trying to balance so many different demands on our lives and on our skills and so on. So, if we're really going to be resilient, if we're really going to stay at the fulcrum and stay balanced, then let's do what we can to reduce these sources of stress and to increase positive and supportive relationships, positive activities that we can do for ourselves and for our kids, and then really practice those life skills. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Reuter, and maybe we can talk a bit about some of those, and we can go on to the next slide as well. Let's talk a little bit about those, some of those negatives that we're experiencing, some of the sources of stress, and then, what we can do about that, where some positive ways to influence that.
Do you want me to go ahead and put this next Mentimeter in?
Yes.
The question? Okay.
I forgot the question. What was the question?
What do your children do to de-stress?
That's good. Yes.
Love it. Please.
Yeah. So let's have that going. While we talk about sources of stress. We could go on for ages about the sources of stress right now. We're all kind of stuck at home. And sometimes even the healthiest home relationships can become a bit unhealthy when we're stuck in the house all day with each other. We're not, a lot of us aren't used to being around each other all the time. Now I work with my husband, so we're with each other all the time anyway, so we haven't had a problem with this. But a lot of folks have had a lot of difficulty being home and around their kids all day, around their spouses all day, and anyone else who might be living in their home. And so sometimes unhealthy relationships can come about, and that's very difficult. And that's an area where we really encourage people to reach out for help from, a telehealth, mental health professional to kind of help with those relationship things, because these are real stressors. And even though, this probably isn't going to last forever, it for now is enough. And so trying to address those conflicts is important. You might also have conflicts between your kids. Your kids aren't used to being around each other all the time either. So some of that sibling stuff can come up and be pretty salient. Obviously, what we're all going through can cause us to feel depressed, kind of feel unmotivated, and maybe kind of irritable about the situation. We might be sleeping too much, we might be sleeping too little, and anxiety may also play a role in that. Like Dr. Wingers mentioned, the media can really influence how we feel. The news can influence how we feel. I certainly know that I really, for me personally, I know I need to limit I want to know what's going on, and I make sure that I find out what's happening, but sometimes I need to read the news instead of watch the news, because that helps me stay informed, but with a little less anxiety and anger and depression sitting in. Of course, we can have some stress with the physical and financial consequences. We're not moving around as much, and so we just don't feel as good. We might have financial stresses in our households, and that's particularly difficult with the kind of the unknowns that are happening. Our communities are really disproportionately affected. The Paradise Valley District has a very diverse community. It includes a very diverse community, and consequences can be very different for different kinds of families. So again, that goes back to the idea that we're all in the same storm, on the same sea, in the same storm, but in different boats. When a lot of our students here in the PV district have, we work with a lot of students in the gifted programs, and with kids who are very bright. We run into kind of a conundrum of asynchronous development, what we call asynchronous development, when some parts of the brains are very highly developed and others aren't so much. And we see this in all kinds of kids, but particularly in gifted kids, in which their awareness of what's happening in the world is very high. So they may have a very high ability to kind of know what's happening in the world, know what the coronavirus is and how it works and what it does and what its potentials are and what the financial situation is and the economics in different countries and different places. And so they have a very high awareness of what is happening, but they don't have the insight to manage all the emotions that come with that awareness. So as adults, we have that very high awareness of what's going on, but we also have some insight about, okay, this is, we've had many of these life experiences, nothing like what's going on right now, but we've had other life experiences that have taught us some skills for coping or some skills for getting through things and gaining some perspective on different situations that our youngsters don't necessarily have, our kids don't necessarily have that insight that we gain just by experiencing life for 40 years that they don't have. So that sometimes is it's an added challenge for parents of kids who are very bright and have that increased awareness of what's going on, but don't have the experiences that they need to have the insight to manage them. And again, that leads all of us to feel pretty powerless. I think a lot of us are unsure how to help in the situation. We want to go out and do things to help others, but that puts us at risk. And so we stay home, and so that it's really it's a catch-22. So I think we often feel powerless. And certainly, as we've talked about several times already, we're all facing a very uncertain future. We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. We don't know what things are going to look like in the fall. We don't know what things are going to look like in the next 6 months. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
Right. And I would add to that, what folks are worried about differs. So, I think that adults often are the ones who become more concerned about those abstractions of, the consequences to the economy or society and all of that. And kids are more worried about, what directly affects them, right? They're about the immediate. They're concerned about the tangible, what's most concrete. So I've had families who, their child's biggest question is, well, so will we be able to play on the playground when we go back to school? Or, am I still going to have homework? Because that's what matters the most to them. And I don't want parents to trivialize those concerns or to think that your child isn't isn't facing facts or isn't, you know, wrestling with the right questions. What we find, and this is true not just right now, but in other circumstances with child development, often the questions or concerns sort of unfold over time. Right. So it might be one little question here, and then you're in the car somewhere, and then it's, you know, another question. And gosh, what about bedtime? Bedtime is often a time where parents say all the worries, all the questions come flooding out. I'm having families who are telling me, oh gosh, my kids are having more restless sleep, or don't want to sleep alone, or, you know, and those are, again, just some of the really normal, natural responses to stress. And kids can be so so helped by your response as their caregiver, by your calm, your predictability, your reassurance that we may not have all the answers, but we're in this together and we'll figure it out. I think that goes a long way.
Right.
So,
I'm enjoying looking at this Mentagram. Can we look at that a little bit bigger, Melissa? I can't quite see. I can see swim. Swimming seems to be a major way that children de-stress. I think that's great.
Thank goodness for pools in Phoenix. And
really? All right. Play with the dog, listen to music, watching shows, take walks. That's great.
Yeah.
Riding bikes, lots of outdoor stuff I'm seeing to de-stress.
Playing music, meditating, calling a friend. That's really great.
That is great.
Yeah. So as we jump into the next section, we'll talk a bit more about some of those things that your kids do to de-stress. And I think, you know, many of them are exactly what we're going to talk about. I'd like to spend a little time talking about some of the ways kids can get more exercise. We're talking more about what's reasonable with regard to screen time. I know this is just such a trigger thing, and we're happy to answer some questions. So if you know, if there's something specific in the comments that you want to raise as we're discussing that, feel free to let us know. But we'll talk a bit about that in terms of finding the right balance. You know, sleep and nutrition, we know are so critical. But as we move into that, I'd like to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about this model for how we connect with kids and how we redirect them. So Dr. Bruce Perry is a pioneer in the field of neuroscience. He's done a ton of work with kids with who've experienced trauma or neglect. And this has had far-reaching implications for how we work with kids under stress. So really, I like this model of we have to first start by helping them regulate and calm their freeze, fight, or flight response, right? Often as adults, we start with, well, let me explain to you and let me tell you and talk to you. And often kids, when they're, you know, dysregulated, they're not ready to hear that yet. So we really got to start by just connecting with them at a physical, sensory level. And then really just relate and connect in terms of, hey, I hear you. I see you. I understand where you're coming from. And only then, when they're in that calmer state and less dysregulated, can we really begin to, you know, try to teach them or explain or redirect, you know, in those circumstances where things are getting difficult. So it's a model that we teach and train and practice in lots of different ways in our work with families and children. And I'd encourage you to look online for other resources. You know, that's another point I want to make, and just be sure I don't forget. There's so much great information on the web. There's so many great resources for kids to learn and do projects. There's so many great resources for parents to learn more. So be sure, we're including at the end of the presentation, we've got 2 full pages of links and resources for parents, and I'd encourage you to take a look at those. At Center, we have a Facebook page as well, and we try to post quality content there on a pretty regular basis as well. So I'd encourage you to take a look. Let's move on to that next slide.
Well, speaking of the next slides, and speaking of what Dr. Wingers just said about how many resources there are on the internet, I've been researching these things so that I could share some with you today. And I had such a blast. And several nights in a row, my husband walks into my office and says, are we eating dinner or what's going on? I just couldn't stop. it was so fun to look up all of these different resources. So
it's easy to go down the rabbit hole, isn't
yes,
it?
it's very easy to do that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about specific ways. I think it's
Yeah.
great to have very specific ideas of how to increase positive, supportive relationships and come up with some fun activities for kids during this most unusual summer. I first want to go back to talking just very quickly about structure and routines. We've talked a lot about why that's very important. And again, I think part of why it's important, we often recommend structure, consistency, and routine for kids who have executive function or attention problems. And that's because it's very helpful to decrease the amount of thinking they have to do throughout the day. If they know exactly what their day is going to look like, then they don't really have to think about that, and they can use their cognitive energy to think about something else. It automates, or it helps us automate a particular routine. And once things are automated, then it frees up our brain for newer stuff. So that's one of the reasons that we recommend structure and consistency in routine. We also often recommend it for kids who have anxiety. And I think at the moment, that's pretty much is all of us, not just all of our kids, all of us, to some extent, we're all experiencing some level of anxiety. And the importance of structure and consistency and routine is that it creates predictability in our environments. We know what to expect. Earlier, we were talking about kind of the loss of predictability. We don't know what's going to happen in a month. But if we know that, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to have breakfast and it's going to be this, I have this choice of cereals. And then after that, as a family, we're going to go for a walk. And then I have free time until lunch. And then we're going to have lunch. And then I'm going to do these 3 activities and then free time. And then we'll have dinner at 6, which is what we always do. And then we'll talk about our family activity, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be quite that structured, but whatever the structure is, at least we can predict, we know what's going to happen at our house today. And that helps decrease that sense of anxiety. And it increases our sense of control over what's happening. And boy, have we lost a lot of that sense of control. So having consistency just in our daily routines and at home really helps to decrease some of that anxiety. And again, how do we do that? What does the structure and consistency mean? It means sticking to meal times, just simple things. Having a schedule, you can have a schedule for everyone in the family. It can be different for each person. It doesn't have to include every minute of the day, certainly, but block out times for certain activities and make sure those happen when they're supposed to happen. You can also have an accountability partner. I am working with one family in which, miraculously, one sibling is kind of overseeing the other sibling's schedule, and that works quite well for that family. I'm not sure that's going to work for every family, but you can have an accountability partner within your family. You can have it be a friend. Maybe one of your kids has another friend and they have a schedule and they can check in with each other each day and say, how are you doing? How are you sticking with your schedule or your agenda? It can be a whole other family. If there's another family that has similar interests as your family and similar agendas throughout the day as your family, you can kind of have similar structure and you can check in with each other about how it's going. And always set up some sort of reward schedule throughout the day. So it's not just boring stuff all day, but if we get this done, then we can get to this other activity that's very rewarding.
Love that.
Sleep. Do you want to touch on sleep, Dr. Wingers?
Yeah, sure. You know, I love sleep. How about you? And I think very often we don't get enough of it. I have to say, this is one silver lining that I found for a lot of the families that I work with, that as things shifted to online and, less designated times of the day for kids to be in school, that I found some kids were getting more sleep, much needed sleep. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself shifted the stress level. I found kids who were better able to focus. I found kids who were feeling happier, who were feeling less stressed, less irritable, because they were getting more sleep. I don't know if that's the experience of any of the folks on this call, but it was a surprising and pleasant effect for me. And it certainly made me think about one of the questions that I'm asking all the families that I work with right now, which is, out of all of this time that you've experienced, all this new stuff you've experienced, what do you want more of? And maybe what do you want less of? And I think that's a question I hope all of you are asking yourself. What do I want more of? What have I learned from this experience of being at home in the way that we are, that will benefit us as we move back into whatever our new normal may become. And I think more sleep is one of them. So that's why I digress on that point. I'm aware of our time, and I want to be sure that we get a chance to talk more about screen time and time with friends, but also to talk with the audience and get some of the questions that are coming in. So I'm just going to refer you over to the American Academy of Pediatrics. Their website has some great resources as far as sleep guidelines, what's important for different ages, as well as what we need to be thinking about with regard to sleep hygiene. If you've got a child who has any sleep issues, I'm sorry it's not on this slide, that's a great thought, but it wasn't. So AAP, or American Academy of Pediatrics, is the website that I'm suggesting. You Google AAP and healthy steps or sleep hygiene, you're going to get some good information there. It's something I talk and train about a lot as well, so I'm happy to answer other questions about it, because different ages need different amounts of sleep. There's different issues associated with sleep issues. For example, there's been some studies that indicate that something like, oh gosh, I don't quote me on this, but something like 40% of kids who've been identified with ADHD either instead of or also had an underlying sleep issue. So to me, sleep is key. But with that, I'll send it back over to you, because I know you found some really fun things on online for some exercise options and things to do as a family. So I'll send it back to you, Dr. Reuter.
All right. I work with lots of families who are having a real hard time with the whole exercise bit. I think, kids, we all know that kids need to be active. They need to be moving around. I think most of the time, a lot of kids just automatically get exercise without us thinking a whole lot about it. While school's going, they have PE, they're playing on the playground. And then during the summer, in addition to swimming, they're, going to the zoo and the trampoline park and running around with their friends. And so they get a lot of exercise just by being kids. That is not necessarily the case right now. Obviously, swimming is awesome. And so lots of kids can get some good exercise with swimming. But beyond that, what do? We can't be running around with friends and doing other things. And screen time, we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But sometimes it's hard to get kids away from those screens to do some exercise. So I did a little research on how to integrate maybe some screen time with exercise, and also came up with some ideas of other things that you can do. There's lots of different fitness apps out there. Some of them have cost involved, some of them don't. On the resources page that we're going to provide to you later, I have a list of ones that are at no cost. There's one app, there's some things that are better for older kids and adults, and some that are better for younger kids. In terms of older kids and adults, there's the Down Dog app, which is like a yoga app, and it has lots of different yoga classes, and it has bar classes and high intensity interval training classes. But it really would be more appropriate for older kids and adults, but that's a great, it's on the next page after that. Melissa, I didn't list that one because it's not free of cost, but I also on this page put my favorite one, PE with Joe. I'm wondering if anybody knows about PE with Joe. The reason I know about PE with Joe is because I have a niece and nephew who are ages 7 and 10, and they live in Edinburgh, Scotland. And Joe is this guy who I think his website is bodycoach.com. I think it's on there. Oh no, I put that. Oh yeah, Body Coach is what he calls himself. So he's like this fitness guy who's very famous in the UK. And when kids had to start staying home from school, he started PE with Joe, which was a live stream PE class every morning, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. And it's still happening. Unfortunately for us, 9 a.m. there is like 2 or 3 a.m. here. So that's probably not going to be ideal for a live stream. But what was neat about it there is that all the kids in the UK were doing it. And so it was a neat way for kids to connect with their friends and say, oh, did you go to PE with Joe this morning, and the whole bit.
Oh, fun.
He has recorded every single day since March 23rd until now. He's like crashed on his bike and had hand surgery, and he just keeps at it with a cast on his arm. I saw one the other day with that he did the entire session in a panda suit. He makes it very fun, and integrates some learning as well. So I can't recommend PE with Joe enough. You could see all of his classes on YouTube.
I think I want to do PE with Joe.
I think I want to do PE with Joe. It is kind of cool for the whole family to do it. And he doesn't use any, you don't need anything. You don't need weights. You don't need any things. You just need a little
Well, and that's what I love about some of the other resources you have here too, Dr. Reuters. You know, they're free, they're easily available. You don't need anything special. There's so many ways to just have a quick little dance party with your kids, or, you know, anything just kind of silly and spontaneous, and something that is fun and sustainable, it sounds like.
Yep. Exactly. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you can see some of the other ones listed. And the ones towards the end there, the Go Noodle, Nido Kids, and UNICEF Kid Power are all really good for younger kids. In fact, which one is it? The Neo Kids. That's a series of YouTube classes, and they divide their classes into age ranges. So they have different classes for ages 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12. So it's very specific for different kids. Now, some of the other things that you might do outside of apps is learn the latest dance with your kids. Dances are big these days. You can make a TikTok video with your kids.
And your teenager will roll their eyes and groan.
There's that. But there's lots of different fun things that you can do to not just get your kids moving, but also engage with them in the movement. I know a lot of families are taking walks, which is great, hiking, even when it's safe to do so, taking day trips just to get out of town, go up north and take a hike, or go to the lake and do some kayaking or swimming. Those are great ways to get some exercise, and also a change of scenery that can really help with mental health as well.
Great. So I think, again, in the interest of time, let's move on and talk a bit more about some screen time guidelines and some of the issues that come up with that. I'm sure we'll have questions from some of the viewers about screen time. As you see here on the resources page, we've talked a bit about some articles that give some good guidelines. I would add to these a couple of other resources I really like are Common Sense Media. Many of you are probably familiar with Common Sense Media in terms of just some good guidelines. It also helps you kind of vet the content of shows and movies and video games and all of that. So love it. If you don't already, I recommend following Katie McPherson on Facebook. She's another great resource, and in terms of some of the digital culture issues that are facing our kids with social media and so on too. So this is something that, you know, depending on the age of your child, how many kids you have, circumstances you find yourself in, you probably need to be somewhat flexible in your guidelines. A couple of things that I wanted to say, and then please join in, Dr. Reuter, but a couple of rules of thumb that have worked well for me as I think about the families I work with. Number one, big screens are better than small screens. So if you think about it, it makes sense. TV, better than the iPad better than the phone in terms of it pulling your attention, your ability to kind of engage with the rest of the world around you, and let's be honest, for your ability as a parent to monitor what's going on as well. Really, I like to keep screens out of bedrooms. I highly recommend keeping screens out of bedrooms, shutting down, and I know teenagers will groan at this, but shutting down at a reasonable time each night. Don't need to sleep with their phone. You know, those kinds of things I think are important. And for younger kids, again, this often can be your only time of the day when they're not mom, right? And so, hey, we love us some TV or some video game time if that's the case. But again, let's be mindful and let's be aware of what they're watching, where they're watching it, and who they're watching it with. I'm a big fan too of tying it to other kinds of things. Hey, you want 30 minutes of video game time? Great, let's go swim or take a walk first. You want 30 minutes of video game time? Great, let's get your room cleaned up, and then you can have it. So kind of earning that time or tying it to something else that you find valuable for your kid. So a couple of things I'd say there. I don't know if there's others you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important when we think about screen time, I agree with Dr. Wingers. We need to be a little bit more flexible, and I think being more flexible about screen time right now is certainly warranted. But I think it's important to classify the types of screen time that's going on with your kids. So screen time that's used for social connection is important. Kids engaging in social connection with a variety of friend groups is very important. So I think kind of classifying social connection screen time as being different from gaming screen time is important. And also, kids are learning. Sometimes kids learn a lot. So when they're engaging in learning activities on a device, that's a little bit different too than watching TV. So classifying those different types, if instead of saying, you can be on a screen for 5 hours a day or whatever it is, that's not what I'm recommending, but whatever it is, say, you can do this amount of social stuff. You can watch TV for this many hours. You can play games for this amount of time. And so to kind of look at the difference of the type, like content matters. So look at the content of what's going on with the screen when you're making decisions about how long kids can be on a particular device. And also, I know that you've probably heard this before and everybody's rolling their eyes when I'm about to say this, but if your kid's into a particular video game, play it with them or watch them play it and engage with them as they play it, and encourage them to learn new kinds of games. When we play the same game over and over, it stops benefiting our brains. But if we learn a new one, then that engages us in learning and stimulates our brain a little bit more. You can also use screen time to help kids engage in social projects. One idea that somebody shared with me is that their friends all got online, they researched how to make jam. And then, I don't know how many kids there were. There were 5 kids, and one made strawberry jam, and one made grape, and one made raspberry, and whatever. And they each made 5 jars, and then they exchanged them either by drop-offs or by mail. And so that was kind of a neat project, but they all had to coordinate with each other online to figure out the recipe and how to do it and who would do what. So you can kind of expand that screen time to include some projects and some planning and organization kinds of activities.
That's fantastic. There's some really cool citizen science kinds of endeavors online too, where you can make observations or help solve problems. And, for some of your kids who they may be really interested in doing that kind of thing too. One more thought on screen time before we transition to our Q&A. Often an issue that comes up with families that we encounter is the difficulty of getting your kid to stop being on their device, right? And the battles that kind of have come up about that. So again, the answer to what to do about that is it depends. And there's a whole bunch of kind of problem-solving things you need to go through there. But a couple of rules of thumb that I would say. Number one, being really clear and really consistent matters. So if one day you're like, oh yeah, you can play more, and another day you're like, nope, you're done, your kid's gonna say, wait a minute, that's not how it was the other, so they're gonna kind of test those boundaries. The other thing I'll say is that for some kids, again, when you think about what's happening in their brain and their engagement with a task, it's very difficult to shift off of that, especially for certain kinds of video games. So one technique that's worked beautifully for a lot of kids is to, rather than okay, hey, I need you to get off now, and then the arguing and the fighting about it, is to not even give them the countdown, because I think sometimes the countdown, 5 minutes, increases anxiety, but to sit down next to them. And just to sit down next to them and kind of, as you recommended earlier, Dr. Reuter, just what are you doing? Show me what you're doing. How are you doing in this game? Who's this character? What's that all about? Asking some questions, showing some engagement, and then saying, okay, let's find a good stopping point. And when you can do that together, it may be 5 minutes on the front end of your time and investment, but it results in 30 minutes or half hour, prevents a 30-minute or hour-long, argument later on. So, and it shows your child you care what they're doing too. You respect their time as well. So, little tip there. With that, I think we'll transition over to talk a bit about some of these other questions that may be coming in and make sure that we can really answer the things that our audience has asked. So Melissa, Jessica, anybody have something they'd like to pop in and say?
Thank you so much. I just want to say that last tip that you just gave specifically about, not doing the countdown, I have seen personally that in and of itself has caused tremendous confrontation and stress with my 8-year-old. And so I love your suggestion about going and sitting next to him. And so I'm going to try that. Actually, he's on right now, keeping himself occupied when we get off today. That's what so thank you for that really useful tip. I'm going to use literally in 10 minutes.
Fantastic.
So we did have a question come in a little while ago that I want to make sure we address because I'm sure if there's one parent who's experiencing this, there's certainly others. And so really, really important thing to address. And her question is, how do you help a child who is terrified that they or one of their family members is going to die from COVID-19? And she also just included in there that, they really try not, they don't have the news on, they haven't experienced them, anyone close to them personally dying, but obviously this is something their child is worried about.
Yeah. I'm happy to jump in and Dr. Reuter, if you want to share some thoughts too. But one of the first things that I think it's important to acknowledge is, there's kids who are terrified is the right word. Often these are kids who are already perhaps at risk for some anxiety. So they're worrying in general about other things. And now this very real, very present kind of threat has come into play. The person who asked the question didn't mention the age of their child, and I think that's another important piece. But I really am a big fan of being completely open and honest at a developmentally appropriate level with kids. So I think it's very appropriate to say, there's a virus. There are some people who are getting very sick from this virus. Most kids are not getting sick. We're doing a lot of really great things to keep our family and our community safe. So I, as your parent, feel really confident that we're going to be okay and that we're doing the right things. And I get that it's scary, and I get that you're worried about it. That's okay. And I'd normalize that, but I wouldn't let it prevent the child from doing things that you think they reasonably should be able to do. That's the tipping point. A lot of times when we have kids with anxiety, it hurts our heart so much to see them, scared or worried, that we want to protect them and we want to rescue them, and we want to say, that's okay. You don't have to go to that scary event, or you don't have to do that thing that worries you. And I think that one of the big things that kids need to know is that they can tolerate distress. They can tolerate worry and fear and come out the other side of it. That's so valuable, such a valuable life skill for them to learn. So I would encourage that parent and others out there who are facing that to do that kind of thing. But if you really feel like you're running into a roadblock, ask for help. Again, that's one of the mantras we've talked about throughout this. Hey, we are not okay. We need some help here. And there's some really great resources to support kids in that. Dr. Reuter, you want to add anything there?
I think your response was perfect. I think, the main things are to normalize it, validate it, talk about it. Don't avoid talking about it. I think it's important to be very transparent about it. And then go back to that acceptance piece of what can we control. This is why we wash. Whenever we go out, the first thing we do when we come back in is we wash our hands. And so they know that they can do that, and that keeps our house a safe place. Yeah. And you can, identify the things that you do to keep yourself safe and to keep your community safe. That if you wear a mask when you go to the grocery store, we wear a mask to help make sure everyone else is safe. And so that gives children kind of an idea of, okay, these are the things that we know can help. Yeah. And you can share some of the science with them about, what we know about the virus and what we know helps prevent the virus. And then they can become empowered to do those preventative things themselves. And then it becomes a little bit less painful, I think, when we do that with kids. When they know that they can't see their friends, then they're like, well, I'm not seeing my friends because I'm doing my part in helping our community stay safe and healthy.
And I love that piece.
Staying off.
Yeah, I think finding ways to help, gosh, maybe write a letter to the hospital, to the nurses, and make a donation, do something that helps you feel empowered that you are somehow contributing in a positive way. Right. And I'll come back to the caregiver mental health piece there too. Check yourself. If you're experiencing a great deal of anxiety and fear, and whether you're expressing that overtly or not, it's going to come across. So recognize your own levels of concern, and if that's something that you're struggling with, again, get some help with that. If it's not coming from your own worry, it's just some children, like I said, are going to experience that more than others. Again, that's going to make a big difference. Anything you can do to co-regulate. We talk a lot about kids needing to self-regulate as they become older, and that's true, but we also co-regulate in relation with one another. Other questions? And
just, I was going to say, if you have other questions, please type them in the chat box. We will share them. Because the doctors are on the Zoom call with us. They're not on the Facebook Live necessarily, so they're not seeing them. And that's why you're hearing Jessica and I send these questions out. I was going to share, we were surprised our 13-year-old all of a sudden thought she was going to die by going to the school when we had to go pick up stuff. And it completely threw us off because we don't watch the news and other things, but we said, okay, we got to go over and pick up your stuff. And she was being slow and not getting ready. And we said, what's going on? She said, well, I don't want to die. We're like, what? So, we were able to address it, but it caught us off guard because we didn't realize she was feeling those things and feeling those concerns. So, and I want to remind people on this call, please, we have lots and lots of videos. One of those is yours, Dr. Wingers, on mindfulness. It's an amazing presentation with lots of great tools for some programs that you can access and allow kids of a variety of ages to use mindfulness systems, whether they be meditation or just breathing techniques. So something really useful. We have a lot of those videos available for you. Jessica, I think we had a couple other questions.
Yeah, so there was a question about, during this time, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase here a little bit, but during this time, we're practicing social distancing as a society and really encouraging, our kids and our family members to make sure that they're safely at a distance from others. Have you heard or read anything about concerns about, moving forward, getting back into life, kids having lots of anxiety around, getting close to people, getting close to family members, even that, you may have potentially, let's say, vetted to some degree, right? Your grandparents or aunt or uncle that, has also been, social distancing and is not necessarily out and about. And so you've agreed to have dinner, and kiddo is afraid to come anywhere near them or speak to them. Have you heard about any of this, or do you have some advice for parents about how to navigate some of that?
I think that's an issue that I think is confronting not just kids, but adults as well. I think as the longer that we continue this way, and I think it realistically will probably be several more months that we need to practice social distancing and we need to be careful. I think it's becoming so much the new normal that when we get the green light to go back to the way it used to be, I think we're all going to be a little bit like, really? Like, is it okay to shake your hand or get closer to you in the grocery store or go to the movies? I think we're all going to be a little bit reticent to go back to what things were like in December. I think, again, just like for kids who just have a lot of anxiety about things, I think it's important to talk to kids about how they understand the situation. What do they understand about the coronavirus, and what do they understand about COVID-19 and how it spread and what we can do And the more we talk to kids very openly about, kind of the science behind that has informed us about the virus itself and what we can do to protect ourselves, I think then they feel more confident. So if we're able to say, grandma's been just at home, she hasn't gone out anywhere, and we've been very careful being at home too. And when we do go out, we distance and we wash our hands a lot and use hand sanitizer a lot. So we've done all the things that we can do to stay safe as well. And so within that context, it's safe to go see grandma or for grandma to come over or whatever the situation may be. So again, going over and really not just telling your child, oh, this is what coronavirus is and this is how we prevent it and this is why we're safe. Mm-hmm. What do you ask your child? What do you know about it? And what are you afraid might happen if grandma comes over? And let's talk about what your fears are, and then kind of test out whether or not the beliefs or the appraisals that are fueling those fears are based in what we know to be true about the virus and how to prevent it. So engage them in that conversation rather than just telling them it's fine that grandma comes over.
Yeah, and I've experienced that on a personal level. Like kids have been concerned about seeing relatives because they're worried they're going to put them at risk, and so I get that. That's a very valid concern. I think it's pretty widespread, as you said, for both children and adults. And I love your response. I think that's spot on, Dr. Reuter.
Thank you. Other questions?
How do you deal with students as we get ready to start school again with their concerns that they won't be able to, say, do band or theater or PE for what they are used to?
Yeah, boy, what's going to happen in the fall is the $1 million or billion or $1 trillion question, isn't it? I know that I've been following those discussions both at the local, state, and national level very closely. I'm just interested in making sure that we are advocating in our communities as well to make smart decisions that take care of all of our families. So I think one of the things that your children are facing when they're asking those kinds of questions, well, hey, maybe I'm not going to be able to do my sport or to do band or theater, or this is my thing, this is my identity. Those are real challenges, and I come back to some of those principles we talked about earlier, which is to really listen and really acknowledge and validate where they're coming from. And when they're ready, help them problem solve. Again, one of the things that I found so important through this is, how do we find meaning? How do we find purpose? So guess what, kid? You're living through remarkable times. What are you going to remember about this? What are you going to do about it in your life? How do you, and again, depending on the age of your child, they're more or less able to answer those kinds of questions. Like, but how did you want to be able to talk to people later about what you did or how you handled it? And so if you have to pivot, that's become one of my favorite words. Let's pivot here and say, all right, maybe I can't do band, but boy, I sure can take private lessons, or we can do this on Zoom. Maybe I can't do theater, but maybe I can, find other ways to engage with that community or to build my skills. Maybe I can't participate in my team sport, but I can build my individual skills in that sport that I love, and recognize that I'm, kind of training for the future. So I guess that's a couple of my initial impressions about how I would respond to some of those things. That I don't want us to wallow in the loss either, that there are some losses, but there's some opportunities here. So how can we pivot? How can we be creative and think about this and move forward in a positive way?
I think that's spot on. And I think what I would add to that too is, I think for a lot of kids, those activities aren't just the activity itself that they're missing. Band isn't just about playing an instrument. It's about socializing. It's about getting that support from your I think kids who are involved in band and drama, they're their people. Yeah. And so not being able to connect with your people in that way, I think is a real part of that loss. And so kind of breaking down the loss into its multiple, it's a very dynamic loss, and acknowledging it, you can't play your instrument, and you also can't see your friends. And so you also can't like make all those crazy, stupid jokes that you make with all your friends, like at the end of the band hallway, and, acknowledge those losses too. And again, I love what Dr. Wingers said about, what are you going to do about it? Let's think back and let's write history as we're going through it, and figure out ways to adapt. I think kids can be so resilient, and this is a time like no other time to figure out ways to be resilient, to figure out, here's the 4 things about band that I love and that I'm going to miss, and how am I going to fill those gaps? How am I going to be with my friends? How am I going to make music? I think there's been so many. I think we've all probably seen cool, like, I don't know how they do it. I couldn't even begin, but what a neat project to have, have your child who's in band put together a Zoom band and put together a song and play it on Zoom and record it, or same with the choir, in kids who are in drama. Man, the amount of content that's happening right now that can go into a great screenplay or a
movie.
Oh my gosh, there's
Yeah.
all kinds of ways, kind of projects that you can do, that you can connect with other people and do things with other kids on social media, and connect. So I think it's, I guess the take home is, number 1, validate it's a big loss, but number 2, break down the loss because it's such a dynamic loss, and adapt and find ways, challenge your kids to find ways, and to organize with their friends to find ways to fill those gaps.
Ladies, I can't thank you more for spending this evening with us. It has been amazing, and we greatly appreciate your insights. I was going to just throw it back to each of you if you wanted to finish up. Jessica, do we have any more questions?
No, I think that our wonderful presenters did such an amazing job too with their presentation. That honestly, I think they did cover a lot of concerns. So yeah, thank you so much to both of you. This has been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was going to say, if you guys wanted to do just a quick, each of you, just a couple of seconds and maybe a minute each on really what would be the key takeaways you just want to remind parents about as we're living through these unusual times.
Oh, what a great question, Melissa. I'll jump in, and just my initial impressions are just some of the things that we talked about right from the very beginning, recognizing that, yeah, this is a different time, and what we're facing as individuals, as families, as communities, as a society, this is unprecedented. I'm so sick of that word, unprecedented, but it is, right? And so, again, I keep coming back to finding meaning, finding purpose. Mm-hmm. What can I do for myself, for my family, for my community? How do I dig deep? How do I use all the resources that I have learned from my long and colorful life, whatever that might be, to support me and to support others in this time? Keeping it simple, recognizing that what matters most is your presence as their caregiver. So if you've got a solid, safe, nurturing relationship, if you can provide some semblance of structure and routine through these times, you'll be surprised what your kids will remember about this time. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily going to be all the losses. It's going to be all the gains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that the take homes are, what to do with my kids this summer. Go easy on them. Go easy on yourself. Create a structure, but be flexible in that structure, and make sure that it includes lots of fun and different activities. Include physical activity, include relaxation, include just time to be, and maybe some time just to worry. Take care of yourselves so that you can take care of your kids. And find ways to find that adaptability and that resiliency. What a great opportunity for us to do all that, but without ignoring the losses and the difficulties. above all, be transparent about all those different feelings that we're feeling. There's so many. It's hard to name them all, but it's important to feel them all and just to move through it together as a family and to support each other.
What a joy it's been to talk with you guys today. A pleasure to present with such a dear friend and respected colleague. And thank you, Jessica and Melissa, for having us and supporting the PV schools parent community. You guys do a tremendous job. And if anybody is new on here, I sure hope that you're taking a look at the amazing library of resources that you guys have compiled. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Don't disappear, but I'm going to switch back to the screen. I'm going to share back the screen so we've got your contact information out there. And I just, again, want to say, let's see if I can get the right screen up there. I just want to say that we do have many videos. Both of you have done presentations for us before. They are on both our YouTube location. If you look, we've got YouTube down on the bottom. You just need to search on YouTube PV, and there is a space there, UPC. You also can find those videos on our Facebook page, which is UPC PVUSD, and look to our video history there. Again, we really appreciate your taking the time with us today. Both of you have been amazing. It's been incredibly helpful, I know, for my cohorts there. Kia has also been on here on Zoom, and Jessica and I, we've been chatting on the side and just commenting on things that we know we're going to be able to use for our kids. And it's wonderful to have that opportunity. And we hope we'll be able to bring you back on even this summer. We know parents have been anxious for communication and for us to reach out to them. Jessica, in fact, with that in mind, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think you pretty much covered it all, and just want to thank everyone again. And I know I personally spent a lot of time sort of looking into, a lot of the topics anyway that you've addressed today. And I know for sure I have a lot of new takeaways personally. So thank you again. I was keeping some notes about some of the things that you both were suggesting. So thank you. Can't thank you enough for being here, for talking to our community, for bringing your expertise and your big heart. So thank you so much, and stay well and stay safe.
You as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.